See, I would have thought the editor thought you were hesitant to leave the news department.
Well,
That's what you'd been doing.
I had a great job at the time. When I was having that phone conversation, I was sitting in my office in Rome, where I was privileged enough to be the Times Rome correspondent. So I did have a dream job, and that would have been a good reason to chuckle.
And you were being offered the job as William Grimes was leaving. Before he became the restaurant reviewer, he'd written about hard liquor, if I remember correctly. And then after he reviewed books for a while, and now he's taken over the obituary page. Are there any lessons to be learned from all of this about how the New York Times operates? You were their political reporter in Italy.
We like to shake things up. Well, when I was hired at the Times too many years ago, they said we don't hire people for jobs, we hire them for careers. And I guess Biff Grimes and I are proof of that.
Well, I think that in the case of a restaurant reviewer, they probably liked the way you wrote. They liked your writing style.
That's right, yeah.
And that probably was more of a concern than as long as you kind of knew the difference between a white wine and a red wine.
Barely, yeah. No, you're right. They wanted first and foremost to put someone in the job whom they thought it would be fun to read week after week. And then that decision having been made, they wanted to make sure it was someone who was a food enthusiast with some good background and breadth of experience.
Well, you write that you viewed the offer as the kind of ultimate dare or dead reckoning that a good narrative called for. So what was the good narrative here?
Well, the dead reckoning in the terms of I had spent so much of my life trying to figure out and failing to figure out a healthy relationship with eating. I'd been an overeater. I'd been a bulimic. My weight had gone up and down. So it just seemed to me like a perfect irony that this person would end up eating professionally for a living.
Do you think you might not have been offered the job had that editor seen you and how heavy you were at the time?
That's a good question. Some of the editors who were ultimately involved in the decision had seen me, so I think I would have been offered the job, but I think that explains why there was a conversation beforehand about, hey, are you of all people sure you want to lash yourself to this many calories? When I was little, I would get so upset if I wasn't given third and fourth and fifth helpings that my tantrums would become so florid that I would sometimes throw up. So I was using that phrase to introduce that degree of gluttony that was in me from the start.
But your mother usually came through.
I think it's hard to deny a kid who wants food, what he wants. I think we're all born different, and I was born with a really big appetite.
And you write, I remember almost everything about my childhood in terms of food, in terms of favorite foods, to be more accurate, or even favorite parts of favorite foods.
Well, like the fatty edges of a lamb chop. I was just a food fetishist from the get-go. It's hardwired into me, and as much as I came to fear food over time, I never stopped loving it.
Now, who did the cooking in your home? Was it your mother or your grandmother?
It was my mother. But in my extended Italian-American family, one of the kind of rules of the road was that after a woman married one of the Bruni men, this is going to sound very sexist, but this is the way it was at the time, the woman would then go to grandma's kitchen and, at grandma's elbow would learn how to do all the Italian recipes.
What was she cooking? Was she cooking old world food?
She was cooking the recipes that she'd learned as a little girl in Puglia, which is a region of southern Italy. I don't think my grandmother ever learned a new recipe in her life. She came to America with a certain arsenal, and she used it well. And she didn't want to learn what she didn't know. She wanted to just ace what she knew. Now
we should point out that you look great.
Thank you.
That nobody would say this is a guy with a weight problem. But you had one for most of your life. What age did you begin thinking of yourself as bigger than everyone else or fatter than everyone else?
Quite early on, probably 4 or 5, because I can, when I go back and I look at snapshots of the family then, it's clear like I'm bigger and rounder than my older brother. I was being taken to shop in different sections of the store. By the time I was 7, kids were teasing that my initials FB must stand for Fat Boy as opposed to Frank Bruni. So
now, why weren't your brothers as involved with food as you? They grew up in the same dining room.
I think it's proof that we all have a different genetic inheritance. I think I inherited, I was born with a big appetite. I also tended to be the physically lazy one, so I wasn't outside running around as much. It's just a matter of nature. And one thing that's always said is kids model their parents' behavior. Well, I watched my mother do the popcorn diet and the grapefruit diet and the Scarsdale diet, and I think I took a cue from that.
You tried all the diets yourself?
Over the course of my life, I probably tried every diet there was. And I would do these I would do like a 3-day fast. I would do a juice cleanse, all of it. Yeah.
But often food, and your story is very much about food being a kind of self-medicating. So when you get depressed because you're overweight, you wind up eating instead of not eating.
Well, I had it worse than that because if I was depressed, I ate. If I was stressed out and jittery, I ate. For me, food was always the answer. It was it was the one pure rush of pleasure I could count on, and it felt almost like a drug to me that way.
And then when you told your grandmother you didn't want to eat something that she'd prepared because you were on a diet, she got upset.
Hell hath no fury like Grandma Bruni denied the ability to feed you.
So what was this? How did this affect you as you were growing up? Did you engage in sports?
I did. One of the things that saved me for a period of time from being overweight was, against all expectations, I turned out to be quite an athlete when it came to swimming. All of my clumsiness on land disappeared when I got into the water. So for many years when I was a teenager, I was swimming about 4 hours a day, and it enabled me not to do the hard work of restraining my appetite because I was burning up so much.
And were you losing weight as a result?
I was a only moderately or slightly heavy kid for as long as I was swimming.
And then you also tried other things like fasting and taking amphetamines.
Well, what happened is after I quit swimming, which I wanted to do, I was kind of tired of it. I knew that I had to come up with something else, and that was right. It was right then that I, for a little while, was bulimic. And then after that, there were amphetamines. I was always looking for a magic bullet,
Well, you write that bulimia is a logistical and tactical challenge as much as anything else. It demands planning.
It does, yeah. I knew on campus where all the bathrooms were. Actually what I knew was where all the private bathrooms were. So I knew that I could go there, or over there and find a bathroom that would shut and I could be alone.
Well, you couldn't blame your mother and grandmother's cooking for this problem now.
I don't blame anyone. I mean, I think I just...
Well, you were in college.
Yeah.
This was an opportunity to change your ways.
Right. But I'm an example of someone who was always trying to find an easy way out, and that's why decades went by before I had the kind of healthy relationship with food where I could be a restaurant critic.
What was your waist size when you were in college?
In college, it was pretty normal. I think it was probably 33, 34, but it was being kept that way through these unhealthy means.
What about just working out in the gym?
Well, that's what I do now. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, the answer in the end is an unglamorous one. It's portion control, it's exercise, it's energy in, energy out, but I wanted to cheat the system.
So it was bulimia and laxatives and things like that.
Bulimia, laxatives, amphetamines, as you mentioned. I mean, all for brief periods of time, but one after the other after the other.
Well, exacerbating this whole thing was that you realized you were gay. I don't know when when you finally knew for sure that you were gay, but looks can be very important within the gay world.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I knew I was gay from a very young age, and the pressure I felt as a young adult and as a young man to look thin and to look good, I think was exacerbated by the notion that that was a special currency in the gay community.
So it affected you when you were thinking about dating.
Yeah, no, I mean, it ratcheted up the anxiety of everything, absolutely.
And what happened? Were you treated like a fat boy?
Well, I wasn't always fat. I was always going up and down. And when I was down, I would date. I mean, when I was down in weight, I would date and I would do okay. But I was always haunted by this notion that fatness was right around the corner.
What happened when you went to visit Scott?
When I went to visit Scott?
Yeah.
From the book. Well,
yeah.
One of my even when I wasn't overweight, I was so convinced I was or worried about it that that was a first date of sorts in which I refused to take my windbreaker off the entire time, and somehow thought I had convinced him that I was more comfortable that way. When
Even
really
though
I
you were sweating.
Right. I just really thought it would be great if I could just not expose my body.
Your mother didn't give you a hard time about being gay. Didn't she try to fix you up with a waiter at one point?
I had a great mother, and yeah, once she kind of got over the slight, unsettled reaction, like, wow, my son is gay, she immediately proceeded to, how do we make sure he's happy? So once when visiting me in college, she tried to pick the waiter up for me, yeah.